Hello, everyone. I'm Daniel, as always, and I don't think I need to introduce Justin. You probably all know him from playing board games, but he's joining me for this crazy thing called the Yithian Cup as part of the Hunters of the Mythos challenge. And just want to go through. You probably have heard a little bit about this from Justin's channel, about the overall plan of all these people are going to come together and play through the Forgotten Age, and one of the categories is the Yithian Cup, in which we play as Yithians. So, thank you for joining me for this deck building discussion, Justin.
I'm very excited.
So, I have a bunch of slides here that kind of help us
Mhm.
guide our discussion. We all both have some ideas and answers to, I'm sure, all of these questions. And Justin said you've got the ramblings of a madman written down somewhere.
Yes.
So, without further ado, let's just sort of remind ourselves about what we're playing with. It is the Yithian body investigator that you've probably seen before from the Forgotten Age. If not, you probably shouldn't be watching this because spoilers ahead.
Yeah.
But this is an investigator that you get to play with, and the scenario it features in is a little bit funky. And when you first play with it, you're like, how do I actually perform using this investigator card? But the ability on here, after you commit a card to a skill test, you're performing double the skill icons on that card limit once per test, is quite strong. All twos, though, means that you do need to make up for those by committing things. So, Elder Sign effect, +2, draw one card. If that happens, that would be really cool. I find that in the scenario that he's in, City of Archives, you get some extra card draw from the scenario itself, so it makes it a little bit easier. So playing with this for the entire campaign is going to be a challenge. Now, the other side of it is, well, you get every card. The deck building now is every card in the game, 0 to 5 of any class, and then neutrals. The additional deck building requirements are that you get this Thirst for Knowledge card. This is a permanent asset that puts some restrictions on this unbounded deck building. You cannot play, put into play, commit, or use any capacity on a non-weakness player card unless all of the traits on that card have been learned and or are printed on your investigator. So you already come with Monster and Yithian, I guess. So if there are any monster traded cards, you could use them. But the Yithian card here, the permanent, you can use already. Now, how do you get to learn more traits? Reveal a non-weakness card from your hand, or choose a non-weakness card you control and choose one of its traits. Then test Intellect X, which is half the traits that you've learned, rounded up. So the first one that you do is going to be 0. You haven't learned any traits yet. If you fail, discard that card. If you succeed, you've learned it, and you check the box on. There's like a list of learned traits that we were given, which is just every trait in the game. And that's how you continue to use the cards in your deck, because otherwise you can't. Um, so let's have some discussion points to talk about. There's a number of, I think, challenges and cool things about this. So let's go through them. This is just an overall like blueprint. I've got slides for each of these, and we can talk about them. So feel free to butt in. So one I just sort of mentioned, like the Yithian ability in the stat line. You have to overcome all twos
Hmm.
in a campaign with a -5,
Yep.
but
Just
you
two auto fails. That's
and
how
just two autofiles.
like so the Yithian for the City of Archives, your stat line is kind of balanced around it, and then because as you said, you have that additional draw, which we're not gonna have. Um, so I think like card advantage and is going to be like the way to beat that weakness because everyone else who has lower stats, they have advantage in another way, and the Yithians like literally require cards to do that, and
Hmm.
we need to like make up for that in some way.
Then there's the back of the card. Having access to every card seems really strong. And is this beneficial, or is it a trap? And by here, a trap, I mean like, are you overthinking, I could take any card, and then you realize you actually can't really play with them?
Yes, yes, I do think that that is there's going to be a lot to unpack there in this one.
Then, of course, if you can only access so many cards, how many really are you going to try to put into your deck with as far as the traits go? So, as I said, you have to pass an intellect test, which is kind of tough to. You have to have some way of passing that particular kind of test, not any test. But how many are you going to go for? So you do get points. There's scoring for this entire
Mhm.
campaign. You get do get points for the number of traits that you learn, and the more the better, I guess, if you want more points. But on the other hand, the more traits you have, the more different actions you need to take to learn them, and the higher that test difficulty is going to be. So the first one, as I said, is going to be 0. Then it'll be 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, etc. So can you pass the test? Next challenge I think we'll talk about is building a team. We don't get the opportunity to have two identical investigators playing the game.
Mhm.
That's kind of wild.
Yeah.
So how do you build a, two-player team where there's no clear direction for each of your investigators, right?
Yeah. No clear direction, and also no um no idea if like focusing is actually the right way to go about it, right? Because like normally you just hyper focus, and that might actually be bad here.
Yep, we'll find out. The last challenge
Mhm.
is, oh, by the way, we have to play TFA.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. The the hardest campaign and even harder with challenge modes. It's very difficult.
And there's points for winning the cup based on how well you do in each scenario. So do you spend your time, getting clues, getting victory points, etc. There's additional challenges I think specific to TFA we'll talk about that do factor into our deck building questions, but we'll get there. So let's talk about it a little bit more. As far as the Yithian ability and stat line, again, the twos. So you mentioned, I think, a second ago about what it can do for you. And I'm reminded of the run that you had fairly recently with Bryn, where you played TFA just with skill cards.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about like how that went? I mean, it seems like you could just copy paste that here, maybe?
So honestly, that run, I actually do think there's going to be a lot of similarities here. That run was embodied by efficiency, but like no survival. So it was just about like how quick could we win. And I think realistically, like even just taking out the idea of skill cards, I think that that concept is going to be the same here. I think survivability is going to be very low for us, so we need to like make up for it in other ways. I do think skill cards obviously are particularly powerful with the body of the Yithian because they are free events with our ability that also now usually will probably commit for 2 to 4 symbols, which I think is very relevant. Mhm.
Yeah, I don't know the answer myself yet either, but it seems like, how can you take advantage of the thing that you're being given?
Mhm.
But again, the card advantage I think is a struggle there. We'll come back to that in a second. The other thing is, what about the all twos? So there are a number of cards across the whole card pool that say things like increase your base skill for this test to 4 or 5.
Mhm.
Is that one way you can tackle this challenge, or does it go against the ability on the card? So I can imagine a summon servitor working here,
Yes.
kind of as a base 4 all the time.
Yep.
Um, the Trial by Fire, I believe, is one of the spirit cards you can take that raises a stat to 5 for the whole turn.
Yep.
So I don't
Uh,
know, like budget Preston Fairmont or Charlie Kane, kind of that
yeah,
archetype, right?
definitely. No, I don't know if it's going to come up, but I think too. I'll like, yeah, I'll wait. I'll wait till we get to see everything because it might show up.
Mhm. Um, you already brought up the card draw, so this is, I think, the other biggest thing is it's really nice to commit cards, but if they don't draw you cards while you're committing them, whether or not it's like a guts or perception or something, you're gonna quickly run out of cards in your hand unless you have some
Yep.
other way to draw cards.
Yep. Alternatively, as well, any cards that replace themselves are going to go up in value here too,
Hmm.
because if that's the thing, like I think resources are like even though yeah, economy we're not gonna like we're gonna have to build up to our economy. Card draw I think is going to be even more valuable here because card draw is how we are designed to pass tests.
Yeah, so my first um, impression of this is like putting in cards like Lucky Cigarette Case that for the most
Mhm.
part the bag in TFA is pretty nice. It's just that
Mhm.
the -5 at the other end of it is awful, but there's a lot of
Yeah,
zeros.
there's a lot of zeros,
A-
especially in Untamed Wilds.
And if you're committing cards and getting that double the skill icons on that card, it's like either you're going to barely pass or you're going to pass by a lot.
Mhm.
And maybe that's a good way to do it. Empirical hypothesis is also in the back of my mind there.
Mhm.
Succeed
Mhm.
by 3 is possible.
Yep.
But there's other ways to draw cards, as you said, on some cards that replace themselves too. So let's think about how much of the deck needs to be something like that.
Yes. Yeah.
Alternatively, if you can draw that Elder Sign all the time,
Yeah. That's like I think that's a way to do it too.
downside is there's nothing on the card that does action compression.
Yeah. So this is the thing I'm most stressed about. Because especially when you think about it, the more traits you want to learn, which I'm sure we're going to cover on the trait one, that is actually an action doing nothing. Like it's for the future. You're basically investing and how much dividends can I get out of this action in the future in my deck building and what I can do. But we're already like action compression negative in a first scenario that is going to be incredibly action like tight. And then it comes into the fact that yes, we don't have any built-in way. We have to earn our own way to get action compression.
Mm-hmm. So think about just dealing damage to enemies, right?
Yep.
The basic tenet in this game is if you're not playing a weapon or spell that does extra damage, what are you doing, right?
Hmm.
Basic investigate seems okay, but dealing with enemies without having all of the traits learned on a weapon is going to be very difficult.
Very difficult. Yep.
And there's a lot of 3 health enemies in this campaign, right?
Yes. Yep.
I think last week you played last week in real time, not on YouTube time.
Yep.
Um, you played Death of Yoth, I believe,
Yes.
with some patrons, and just like flat out died to retaliate on Fang of Yig.
Yep. Yep. It's a 3 attack enemy. It's a 3. It's like a 3/3/3, and then also like we're gonna get poisoned. So like you need to be aware because those guys say you can't commit cards, right?
Yep.
So I might honestly, I think just taking medicine is going to be the way to go as well. I think like it's about mitigating the damage we take from Untamed Wilds as best as we can. Yeah.
Anyway, let's go on to
Mhm.
the card access part.
Yes, the exciting part.
So Charlie Kane, I think, is super cool because he can get level 0 to 2 of everything. Not all at once. You pick two different classes, but then you get level 0 to 5 of every ally, and that's really strong.
Hmm.
Lola can do 0 to 3 of everything, and probably the intention is that her deck building is her strength.
Hmm.
Okay, but how about if you could just take anything in the game?
Anything you want. Um, it's such a power fantasy, but at the same time, to echo what you said is like the in your outline of what we're talking about, it's also a trap, especially in this challenge, to be able to just take anything, because everything you take requires work to be played.
And
Which I
XP, especially at the top end, right? And if you
yes,
can't
yep,
do well at the beginning and you're just, plugging holes everywhere, sure, it would be great to put the exceptional red clock level 5 in your deck, but
mhm,
you're not going to have 10 XP to spend on that at once.
nope, no way.
And it gets removed in City of Archives anyway, so bad idea.
Yes, it does. Yes, I mean, and actually, that's a good point. Yeah.
But the fantasy, indeed, as you say, is that it allows for some unusual combos because most investigators can't take level 3 of 2 different classes. So, what are some combos of cards that you might be thinking about that would be super sick to have in this investigator?
Mhm.
Do you have anything off the top of your mind that you've been looking at?
So unfortunately, no, because my plan, which we'll get to when I show you my mad writings, is very boring. I was like looking at like how do I like I actually didn't think about the I can do anything. I thought like I can do nothing, so what can I do with the least? So like I actually didn't really explore the deck building that much. But I imagine we'll cook up because we're going to be doing some talk in this video, right?
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
I imagine you'll point some things out, and maybe we'll even discover some things. But no, I haven't, and on my end, my it's very boring.
Yeah, I haven't come up with a whole lot either, just because you're right. It's like how I just want to make sure I can even play the cards.
Yep.
Maybe later I'll figure out something cool, but yeah, we'll maybe discover some of that together as we go along.
Mhm.
So indeed, it's still a trap to focus on the card access rather than just the bare minimum you can do to pass tests.
Yep.
So this leads, I think, into just the question about traits. Um,
Mhm.
okay, again, you have to pass intellect tests in order to learn them. and it's, as you said before, an action, and that scales for the number of traits that you're going to be learning. So you can do the first one for free. The second one should be fairly easy too, if you commit some card that allows you to, if you are, if your first trait allows you to commit a card, then in your hand anyway, then the second one's okay, and then after that, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, basically like because it's like 0, 1, 1. Those are the ones that I think are like doable with very little. I think there's also something to game where you can also choose a card and play because you can also be losing cards to this, so you can lose tempo and then like spend an action out of your like an action and a card out of your hand, and like that's pretty rough. So like being able to choose to do it off a card that you have in play is I think some hot tech as well, especially when you choose the order in which you research traits, which I imagine we'll also be talking about here.
Yep, absolutely. Um, I think that has a lot to do with which ones you pick. So there's a lot of very common traits, and I mean I didn't go through ArkhamDB to count up everything. Which ones have the most traits, especially the ones that have just one trait. Of course, are nice to fill your deck out with. A
Yeah.
few that seem common and important are talent. There's a
Hmm.
lot of assets that just have talent on them and nothing else.
Yes. Yeah.
I know that there's been some discussion in your Discord about, what has worked and what hasn't in some test runs, and talent seems like a really easy thing to throw out there. We'll spend some time looking through ArkhamDB and just get a list, but I know like Lone Wolf is one of those, right? I think it's a talent.
Oh yeah, actually, this is I'll show the first of my rambling. So this is I have my list here. It's so hard to see, but it's just everything. And yeah, talent practiced, and then also spell. So like those are like the things that are simple and easy because there's a lot of them. There's a lot of different playable talents like going off that one that you can build a deck around.
Hmm. I mean, you can just be a budget parallel Jenny, right?
Exactly, right? Yeah. She has threes. Twos aren't that different, right?
No. So practice is notable because, well, practice is good, right? It's got deduction, it's got perception. Those are going to help
Mhm.
you just do well in scenarios. Vicious blow also, which does require combat, which may or may not be something we do. But like half of the skills are kind of practice, and the other half are innate, something like that. And the innate ones are nice
Yes.
because unexpected courage can commit for anything, and there's some nice survivor skills that are innate. So that one is also intriguing to me.
And the survivor one's really nice because then you're also can kind of go into the whole survivor plan, which is about like being under or having those stat boosts that you talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm throwing item in here too because a lot of things are item plus something else. Some
Hmm.
things, a few things are just item, but if you're looking at anything, any assets, if you're avoiding things like talent, then things start to become items. Spells, you're right though. That's another really important one, but it requires you to build around them. You can't just
Yes.
be putting out whatever spell and hoping to pass. You need to then upgrade or put out um, skills that'll help you pass those tests.
Yeah.
There's others. Those are just ones I threw out
These are like
there.
the easy ones and the ones that like you'll have to have at least probably one of these on this list, I'd wager for this challenge. At
Hmm.
least one of those four.
And I thought about ally too. Ally is kind of funny in this campaign because there are cards that kind of hurt you if you have an ally, but also cards that are protect you if you have an ally. But there
Yes.
aren't too many allies that are just ally. A lot of them are ally Miskatonic, ally police, ally creature.
Yeah.
Makes them a little tougher to get into play.
Yeah.
All right. That's kind of rolls in the next part is like, okay, you can't use the card unless you have learned all of the traits.
Every single one.
Yep. And
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel about that, but I'm looking at a lot of cards and it seems like I want to play it. And then you're like, uh-oh, how long until I can actually use this?
Yeah, my thought process for this when I was workshopping ideas was that basically anything with three traits was just like, I can't, you're like probably a pipe dream. Unless you are like two of the traits are already part of my plan, I think that it's gonna just be way too tough to get there.
Hmm. I agree. It's kind of like you can do maybe ones with two or maybe three if you can overlap that with a lot of other cards in your deck.
Yes, yeah.
So, how many traits to learn? Oops, that's not. I should have put that here. How many traits to learn? You mentioned maybe not that many, right?
Yeah. So I have three. Like my plan is three, and then like everything else after that is gravy. But as part of my upgrade plan, it might not even happen. So like I think that like this is a less is more type challenge. Even if it actually reads on the tin as a more is more. I think this is actually the way to win is to be as flat as possible.
So counterpoint.
Yeah. All right. No,
I,
I know. I'm interested. Yeah.
um, you probably know I've been playing with Pax and another player online. We're doing this really stupid tarot moon pendant challenge where we're all leaning into can we get 6 moon pendants in play and then commit tarot cards for some crazy number of wild icons.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That it's really fun, but the part that we kind of appreciated at the end, and it's 3 player, so we had some room to do this, was that we all had a different take on how to do this.
Hmm.
One person was like, okay, I'm almost never using the tarots in play. I'm just gonna have tons of card draw and see these tarots over and over. It's kind of
Yeah.
similar to this challenge actually in some ways. And then I was like, okay, that's cool, but also can I get advantage out of having the tarots in play?
Hmm.
And then the third person was kind of somewhere in the middle. So what was fun was that maybe there's multiple paths. Like maybe there's a better
Oh
path
yeah.
for sure, but maybe it'd be fun to explore 2 different takes on this, and then we get an answer to the challenge of like, nope, one way really is better, or it maybe both ways work. So I decided that I don't think I want to learn any more than 9. 9 is you do an intellect 4 test, I believe, to get the ninth
Hmm.
one. And
It really is like opposite spectrums, which is great. And I mean, like it goes into like player style,
mhm.
right? Like, because I'm generally very low to the ground, even if I have no restrictions. So it's I love it. I love that. I love the idea.
Now, the question, of course, is like, how do I really want to go for all 9, or do I stop somewhere in between? But I had fun looking through to see like how much overlap there could be between the different traits. So we'll talk more about our initial ideas in a second, but maybe you can do both. I don't know.
I I, I think you can, and I'll get to that because I think the building the team part is going to be part of this conversation as well.
There it is.
Yeah.
So indeed, we're playing with 2 identical investigators, and it's so weird because you're so used to having like, okay, someone is a Daisy Walker, someone is Mark Harrigan, and
Yeah.
they do what they say on the tin. Either the deck building tells you, or their stat line, or their ability, or some combination of all those gives you a pretty clear focus. But the reality is that there is no focus because the ability is as generic as can be,
Yeah.
and then the deck building is totally open. The only thing is that you need to pass an intellect test.
Hmm.
So, yeah, how do we do this?
Yeah. So it's tough, right? Like that's like yeah, and it's probably by flexing. Like I think that like focusing is bad because if we are ever in a pickle, I think we need to be able to solve our own pickle, right? I think that's kind of like the way to approach it.
Yeah, I think so. I think that is going to work out more often than not.
Yeah.
And
Like I
yet,
don't think we're like 50-50 flex. Like maybe one of us is like 60-40 and the other one's like 40-60, right?
exactly. Yeah.
Hmm.
Because there's plenty of times where you need to pass a tough test, and I don't know if committing a single card does it.
Hmm.
So if someone
Yeah.
can, have the attack spell or weapon in play, um, then they can help solve the problem, because they were already building towards that as part of their game plan.
Yeah.
Or if there's a, I don't know, maybe a intellect 4 test in the first scenario to pass,
Yep.
someone has
That
the cards in their deck to do that already, but that leans itself more into getting clues because that's the kind of test you're taking. I don't know.
and I mean, realistically, I think also, luckily, we know the campaign. You and I have played Forgotten Age a bunch. We know what to expect. I think actually, this is one of those things that, in addition, like, because we have no clear focus, I think we have to let the Forgotten Age give us our focus,
Hmm.
right? And like, our first question is Ishtaka, because she is like the first major threat that shows up, and having to deal with her is our first challenge. I think we take it as like a piece by piece basis, at least for like our level 0 deck, because our level 0 decks are going to be messy. Like I think we both are kind of just aware that that's going to be the case here.
Oh boy. It's going to be interesting because I'm just not used to playing with a bunch of cards that sit in your hand that actually don't do anything.
Yes, yep, yep.
All right. And perfect transition into talking about TFA. And doing well, I think, is better than doing well and getting points from the challenge and just getting XP and not getting as much trauma and all that is better than sitting around learning traits.
Hmm.
I think that that's clear. Although it's fun to, I'm going to play this other mini game. Ultimately, the game still is throwing in counter cards at you every round. You
Yep.
need to explore. You need to uh, avoid whatever hazards are out there. Yeah, I mean that's just the first two scenarios are just wild, right?
Yeah, I think that if you are doing this challenge, you need to be aware that you're going to draw a snake on turn 2. Like that needs to be part of your plan when you're doing this. And maybe it means, one of us holds the snake while someone learns traits, and then they grab that snake from that other person, and then they learn some traits, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it might come down to that where you also need to make some sacrifices. But I do agree with your first point that doing well is going to get more than learning traits. Like if you learn 12 traits, but you bomb every scenario, you're only going to get like 6 points, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, can you imagine how much nicer it would be if you had certain abilities, right? So I'm thinking about certain player cards that might solve these problems in some way. Uh, I mean, the one that just came to mind, obviously, you cannot take, but think about like Alessandro using Beguile when a snake pops up and just
Mhm.
saying, go away, go somewhere
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
And maybe it's worth thinking about some tech cards.
Yes.
I don't know what they
Um,
are off the top of my head, but
let's see,
maybe
I'm really
that
quickly.
is more important than usual because you don't have your whole arsenal.
Oh my God. Yeah. And like, and it's unfortunate because I just looked up some tech cards that would be really good here. They're of course traits that are just random as hell, and you don't have to like. But I do think that tech is important. Like I actually so like in Doom of Etzli, um, there's a lot of stuff where it's like cross-board movement, right? Is can be very important. And like astral travel is a spell,
Hmm.
which is part of my plan. So like that kind of thing to go with that. I think stuff like that. Another one I was looking at was disguise, which I'm pretty sure is 3. That would be great, but unfortunately that's talent trick and illicit, which is quite a number of traits. But
Yeah, the illicit ones, they seem so attractive, but they all have a lot of traits on them.
But I think something that we can also keep in mind too, that if, for example, like you are learning 9 traits, and my plan in my perfect world caps out at like 4 or 5, right? Like I have 3 that I need.
Hmm.
I can also help you. We don't get the bonus, but like if like one of us is able to get their thing set up and they're able to make up the tempo that they've lost from, or like have their plan to at least like get some sort of compression or tempo, I can help you out, right? Or vice versa, right? Depending on how things go.
Yeah, for passing the test, I think that's important. If there is ever downtime, which in two player there's so much downtime.
Yeah, you have all the time in the world. Yeah,
uh, Ancient Evils in the first scenario may just end things prematurely, right?
it can. I mean, like, I think also what is helpful for the mental, if you're doing this solo especially, is set up individual goals that it's not about winning the whole scenario. It's
Hmm.
not actually escaping Forgotten Age. In my mind, if you are able to talk to Ishtaka, that's a win for Untamed Wilds. Or Defeater, of course, the other alternative.
All right, so then we talk about the consequences of not doing everything
Mhm.
well. And that I think is, as you say, you go in, you're going to get poisoned.
Mhm.
We know that there's an agenda flip that is what a 3 or 4 willpower test.
Yeah, and then there's also the foot one that's in the snake bite. So like you're gonna get poisoned. You can't stop both of them.
Is it even worth committing cards to those sorts of things, right?
Like I think that's what's gonna change thing is that the value of tests are going to change, right? Because like normally I try really hard to pass those things. In this one, I might just like hands up, stress free. I'm getting poisoned.
And then what about the consequences of poison? You mentioned the Fang of Yig before. I didn't even think about that. That is rough. If you're poisoned and can't commit anything.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh boy. Maybe sticking together rather than going off on your own is maybe the plan then, right?
I think so. I think like we need to like either always be together or be like one location with some sort of movement compression
Hmm.
between us. Like we need to be like magnets to each other, I think.
Lone wolf, huh? How about
Yeah.
vengeance? Like I know you've played TFA with getting a lot of vengeance before. I've never done more than about I want to say like 15 or 16. It's just
Yeah, that's
always in my
usually where
game
I
plan not to do it.
yeah. I actually I'm not too concerned about vengeance because I actually think our decks are going to reward evading more than they're going to reward other things. I'm actually feeling pretty not too concerned about vengeance. I'm concerned about Doom of Edsley and us having to maybe blow up the temple, but that's the big vengeance burst I'm worried about.
All right, then there's supplies, which is just a discussion I think we'll have off camera before we play. But in I think in particular, we, as you said, medicine is just something we load up on.
Medicine, but there's also like there's this the whole issue where like I've after playing a lot of challenge runs and just Forgotten Age in general, torches are so important and they cost 3 of your supply points.
Hmm.
That like it's just like one of those things where I don't think I'm taking a blanket. We have 7 and 7 soak, which I think is quite a good amount of soak. But then there's also the question of like that binoculars, because like, do you need XP to start popping off, right? Like that's the kind of thing too. Um,
I mean, it's hard to say no, but then like, what do you have to put that XP into that doesn't wreck your game plan, or even more like furthers your game plan?
yeah,
One thing I'm thinking about is trying to load up on some customizable cards because they don't change traits, and you can
yeah.
dump a bunch of XP into them and do fairly well.
That is some hot tech. I actually yeah no I actually have also what is it, the freaking strong card, the power word, like I think is that also like it's you're right, it doesn't change traits. That's huge. And then there's also stuff like the compass for supplies, because the compass, while pretty tame, does make one location in the first scenario not have to spend 3 resources to investigate it,
Oh
and it's a
God.
one shroud location with victory, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So like that's the thing, like those are even harder to like make up for if you don't have like the ability to compress your actions, which we won't in scenario one.
You're right. I've seen you play a lot of TFA
Yeah.
in challenge runs, and is this? Do you think this is like the biggest one in terms of restrictions?
Yes and no. I think that at level 0, like our first decks, yes, this is probably going to be the hardest Untamed Wilds you and I have ever done, right? But I do think that if we get to the end, it's going to be easy.
I had to say, like when I first read about this and thought about it, I was like, I don't know if this is going to be easy or really hard.
Yeah.
And I went back and forth. I was like, look, all you need to do is load up on skill cards, and then you're good. Thinking about it more, it is much more of a challenge. But it feels like I said before about the whole all skills run that you guys had. I think the last probably 4 to 5 scenarios were just breezing through them.
Yep. Because Forgotten Age gives a lot of experience. And while, yes, you need to do marginally good to get that experience, a lot of experience is divvied out in Threads of Fate. That is a very XP rich scenario, so much so they patched it in the Return to, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
You have to spend it on supplies or trauma, right? Um, so like if you make it through that scenario, which is actually a pretty easy scenario, especially when there's tech cards that you can go for it, I do think that this campaign scales very well. And realistically, the hard part of this scenario, of this challenge, is getting traits in your in play. I'm not too worried about the 2 stat line,
Hmm.
because again, anything is possible. So like XP is going to be able to outrun that.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so this is the last slide I have, which is
Yeah.
what are your crazy initial ideas? And I don't know what the format of the rest of this is going to be because to some extent, we're trying out stuff. We're going to look at some deck building and see if we can fill out a whole deck. But maybe just bouncing some ideas off and seeing where that's going first.
All
And
right.
then we can hop over to Arkham DB, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm good to start what my initial plans were when I first got this, if I'm good to start talking
Yeah,
about
sure.
that. So my first thing was the level 4 core talents. Like hyper awareness, hard not all of them. All five. I want 2 copies of all 5 in my deck. But that's a lot of experience. But down the rabbit hole is a talent, which is going to help me. Because the nice thing about down the rabbit hole is it makes those upgrades just happen naturally over time. Another thing that's really nice is that these things don't activate until you learn them. So any when you purchase effects don't
Mm.
act trigger, which means that arcane research is free if you learn it after you buy it, which is good. So then that also makes spells, I think, really powerful.
So
I
you
think
don't
that
take the
if
trauma. Okay, yeah.
yeah, you don't get the trauma from. Oh, that was actually luckily clarified. I thought you would gain the trauma when it did happen, and I was still considering it.
Hmm.
But because you don't gain the trauma, that's really nice. In the thick of it, obviously doesn't work now because of that, but that's okay. So I was then spells and talents are like the core of my deck. And then I looked at practiced and innate because I do agree that you need some sort of skill in this deck to actually do something, right? I think you need at least one of them. I went for practice personally just because it has things like prophesy actually pushed me more than deduction and
Mm.
which it does have, but mostly just because it's promise of power in ways, right? Especially as it goes up. Because if it has 2 symbols, it now has 4. If it has 3 symbols, it has 6. But then we also get perception and overpower, which I think fits really well for the flexing. The downside is, and I'm not 100% on practice yet, like this is like kind of the discussion as we actually put the decks together. Innate has guts, which is really good if I am doing spells. But I think the reality is that one of us probably wants to do practice and one of us probably wants to do innate.
Yep, you're right. That's exactly what my thoughts were as well. I'm not sure which one I wanted. Okay, so here's my dumb idea, and I'm willing for this to be bad. But the first card I thought of when reading this challenge and reading about the using the body of the Yithian's ability as much as possible to get card advantage is the level 3 Grizzly Totem.
Okay, yep.
And that one gives an extra icon, and I believe that gets doubled as well.
Mhm,
And then you draw a card if you succeed. That seems really good. It's
mhm,
got really great synergy with something like Dream Diary, which has way too many traits because the essence of the dream has 2 different ones as well to work. But I think the basic concept can still work with other skills.
mhm.
The problem is, it is an item, a charm, and cursed.
And cursed. I'm just looking at cursed right now because I know there's a lot of good items and charms. Like you even saying lucky cigarette case,
Hmm.
right? So like this is it's very interesting because our 2 approaches right now is the idea of like card advantage versus how can I function without cards. Um, which I think is actually probably a good way for us to cover this because with the talents, I set and forget. And then I also can buy well prepared. And basically, it's like, how can I make my skill value high without needing to use cards from my hand unless I want to?
Hmm.
And I like the grizzly totem because that is just value, right? Like that is just how do I commit my cards and still get something out of it. Now, what are other cursed stuff?
Yeah, so that's the rabbit hole you go down and say, well, what else might I be able to get? And you start thinking about there's other item charm cursed, I believe. There's also maybe just a couple of other cursed cards. I don't want to get into like the cursed tokens per se because that
No, yeah, I
tend
think those would be yeah.
and they tend to introduce other traits as well, like insight and cursed for deep knowledge. But yeah, I mean there's some other things there that might be neat. I think skeleton key is there. I think that's cursed. It's also a relic though, so that might be one of the traits to pick up. Um, anyway,
Yeah, I am really cursed. Yeah.
after I did the whole what about card draw? yeah, as you said, maybe just charm is the way to go for Lucky Cigarette Case. I think Rabbit's Foot is also a charm
Yep.
and an item, so
So,
just load up on all the accessory slots, and there you go. Which requires, I think, every Yithian needs to get talent. It just seems like for getting so many good cards into play or permanents, right? That are
yeah.
talents, you just have to do it. So that's cool. So that was one end of this. And then I thought about, well, what about empirical hypothesis? Because if you don't have the slots for all of your, cool accessory items, then how about something that's slotless, like empirical hypothesis, which is, hey, it's a talent. It's
The talent
also science.
science. All right, let me look up science.
Yeah, let's take a look at
So
science.
I will say I really dig the idea of the customizable cards because I think that that is such a smart way of actually having it be a thing. Oh, there's strange solutions, which are item science.
That indeed was part of my plan. I think I should bring up ArkhamDB now, just because I'm talking off
Sure.
the top of my head, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but um,
There's dream enhancing serum. That ain't like that's also just like card advantage.
it is.
Alchemical distillation. There's, I mean, honestly, science doesn't seem that bad.
So alchemical distillation is another one. I mean, if you want to do something bad, you can put in first aid.
Yep. But I mean, like, if you have talents, that's part of it, right? But I mean, going back to what we talked about earlier with the skills only challenge, survivability needs to be part of in the back of our minds, right? I think so.
All right, we're back. We're looking at things on ArkhamDB now. Just on the screen, I've got talents. I was looking at chemistry set for fun because that's also science. What were you just asking about? You're wondering if
Well, I was just complaining because I was like, curse. Why do they have curse and cursed for traits?
that's a good question.
Because I was like, in the thick of it has curse, which means that like I was like, oh, maybe that's like you could use that to have a way to get cursed in your deck quicker, right? For the Grizzly Totem
Because it's
plan.
permanent,
But
yeah.
unfortunately, that's cursed, not curse.
So
Big difference.
here's a bunch of curse cards. Indeed, a lot of them are with curse tokens, which I don't really want to do. What I was thinking about, other than the Grizzly Totem, there's Bangle of Jinxes, which is kind of neat. That's also item, charm, and cursed.
And
And
it is unexpected courages,
it
right?
is all the way down.
All the way down.
And I want to say, I can't remember. I think alchemical distillation adds charges to things. Is that right?
Potentially. I think I just had that open. Alchemical.
We got decorated skull. All these things are accessory slots, which just drives me crazy. Jessica Hyde is an ally who is cursed. I might go the whole Peter Jessica thing, because if you're going to bother doing allies, you could throw in Miskatonic as another trait, because that is going to open you up to a lot of card draw, like with Laboratory Assistant. I don't think Jeremiah Kirby is just Miskatonic. I think he's something else, like Wayfarer.
Yeah,
But
that
there's some
sounds
good
like
stuff in here. But is it worth
Here's Wayfair. Yeah.
like everything, right? Is it worth putting, spending your time learning a bunch of traits for just a couple of cards? I don't know. I like the idea of item charm, and I looked at the masks, but those are also traded mask. I'm like, oh,
Great. No. Yeah. No, that's they're like I know there was someone in our Discord who was like, I want to play Hallowed Mirror.
mm-hmm.
Hallowed Mirror, you have not only four traits on this one, but then the soothing melody
Oh, those are spells,
adds,
yeah.
I think it's just spell, so it just adds a fifth, but still, right? Like that's it's one of those things where cards that you just like normally play, you now have five traits that you need to actually play this one card, which means five tests. Like that's a lot.
That's insanity. It really
Yeah.
is. All right, so like maybe empirical hypothesis, loading that up with a bunch of I was going to show science. I think you were looking at that earlier. Loading that up with some XP with the alchemical distillation is kind of neat. Then you're already focusing more on doing the intellect test, right? Because that requires you to do a test anyway. So maybe that's good. We don't need the full cards. Let's look at the checklist here for science. Talent science, like first aid, is not terrible. It commits for some good icons, the level 3 version.
I mean, yeah, realistically, like that's also part of this where my idea is that if I'm able to research all three of my traits in the first scenario, every card in my deck can at least be committed to a test,
Right.
which I think is important. Luckily, also, we didn't show our signature weakness. It's just the thing that I think mills the top, like removes the top. It's whatever the Yithian
The
weakness
out of
is.
body experience. Yes.
Yeah,
That is. I thought it was like you shuffle cards back into your deck.
out of body experience. Shuffle each card in your hand. Yeah, you basically just got to do a wheel of fortune. That's pretty sick.
Glimpse the
Shuffle each card from
unthinkable.
your hand into your deck and draw an equal number of cards. Then you shuffle it back into your deck. Honestly, not too bad. Like that weakness is pretty soft, so we don't need to be concern ourselves with that.
All right. When I went down the science rabbit hole, I also started looking at some of these are items and tools as well, adding yet another list. But tools are really, really good in this game, especially now that you have things like crafty, which is a talent to help you out. But I don't know, like having uh, what is
I
it,
mean,
surgical kit or magnifying glass, right? That seems
yeah,
good.
even just a flashlight item tool like that does a lot of value for getting us to where we need to go. I think also one thing we haven't even talked about is economy.
I know.
Like, do we have like what's Voice of Ra? Voice of Ra is just a spell. Okay, honestly, all right, then my economy might be sorted. I got Voice of Ra.
I think you're cooking with just the spells. I don't know. I mean, there's the the upgraded strange solution has some economy in it, which
What is
is
I mean alchemical does as well, I
it
think, right?
does.
One of
You're
those
right.
resources. Yeah.
That one can get you 2 resources, but then you run out of supplies quickly. I don't know. That's the part where you're like, is this really the way to go?
Hmm.
You can get what emergency cache 3 and add supply to your list of things, and now you're adding supplies back to your strange solutions and alchemical distillation. It sounds like fun. It just doesn't. I don't know if it's any good.
Yeah, is it enough, right? Like that's the thing. Yeah.
Hmm. Um. So.
So luckily, to go off your point earlier, how talent is, I think, a must for these Yithians. I agree because there's just so many good things. Like even just like both of us could get Pathfinders in the future,
Mhm.
just to like move, right?
All right. Here.
Albeit I am going to be probably going down the rabbit hole, because I just think like saving so much experience on upgrades is so important that you can get your, because as I said, this is a very heavy XP campaign, and the idea is that the beginning's going to be tougher. So I think that like accelerating the beginning XP gain, I think is going to be better than not doing that.
And that's the best part about down the rabbit hole, right? Is that you suddenly have more XP than you really should at the beginning, even if you pay
Yeah.
for that with other cards that are not upgrades. And if you don't ever get something that's not an upgrade, then even better. But just that snowball effect that Arkham likes to have. Man,
Yeah.
I love some of this stuff that's a talent. Like Studious, really good. You get another day, another
Yes.
dollar, I believe.
Yep.
What do you think about? I mean, this is pretty dumb, but like try and try again. Is that even worth a shot here?
Honestly, it might be. I mean, that's the thing, right? Like these cards that are general, like so. This is the thing that if you haven't done a challenge run before, it completely changes the value of cards. The Going back to Bryn and I's run of Forgotten Age with just skills, Able Bodied, a card that people will probably never play,
Hmm.
suddenly shot up incredibly high in value due to the fact that honestly, if you're playing innate cards, we should probably put this card into our deck here because it'll probably do just as well. So like I actually because the value of this is so low, it might actually be worth it. It might actually, I think, be playable.
Here's Lone Wolf. This is the maybe really good economy card for overlapping with talent.
And honestly, I think Lone Wolf, even still, if you're playing talents, commits for it's a basically a manual dex that doesn't replace itself in this challenge, right? Like it doesn't give you the four that manual dexterity would, but it gives you what you would normally get from it.
You know what a talent is? Kleptomania is a
Oh,
talent, apparently.
Mania, let's go.
Okay, that the weakness ones you can always use, I believe. Let's look at innate then. So that's kind of the big question that I think we tackle first is
Innate
which,
versus practice.
yeah, which one you go for. I'm interested in innate. Look at all these cards that are just innate, man. Um, just because I think
Daring is super good.
daring is so good. Inquiring mind,
Steadfast,
kind of neat
super good.
here.
Inquiring mind. Oh yeah, innate is juicy.
And even if I
Inquiring mind will basically help you pass almost every one of those book tests you need to make to learn it, to learn traits.
exactly, so even if I'm having one corner of the deck do some stupid science thing, a good chunk of your deck being these skills is, I think really what I want to do.
Can
Grizzled,
I be real?
yeah,
Innate might be better than practiced. I think it might be one of those things that both run innate. There's so many good things you're seeing here. Like even true understanding, I think is worth the time.
yeah,
Like anything that compresses stuff. There's also like we get developed because there is grizzled, as I saw you just hovering that. But then that also unlocks brute force,
hmm
um, sharp vision, and expeditious retreat, which is notably that much better in Forgotten Age.
So for Grizzled, you can't buy it first because I don't think you can put any traits on the upgrade sheet until you've learned
Mm,
innate and developed.
that does make sense.
But once you do have those, which you want for other reasons, this starts to get really good because now you get the card advantage from always prepared.
And I mean, yeah, when you learn them, you have, I mean, but then you have to get a developed card. Like, that's the thing, too. Like, to get some of these things you upgrade into, they need to be in your deck before you can even use them, which means that you risk discarding them, which I think is very, very tough.
Look at all this good stuff. I mean, I know half the card pool in Survivor is innate, but
Is very good,
it's
yeah.
crazy. And then you get
I
some
mean,
really
being
cool
able to
stuff.
innate, even just, I think, like, Take Heart is also very opportunist as well. What the? Nimb?
Yeah, yeah. I was
I mean,
thinking
that's
about
what
all these
I
for sure.
these are so good. Sorry, did I say opportunist? I meant to say quick thinking.
Oh, well, Opportunist still, like, this gets you the card
Oh, playable.
back, right?
Yeah.
The upgrade one for sure. Savant, maybe. So this is
Savant,
minimum
maybe.
3, which you can double to 6.
I mean, there is also a lot. Like I'm hyping up Innate, but even just looking at my list of practice, there's a lot of good stuff there too. Fearless, I think, is also very relevant because of, um, your we're squishy. We're squishy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another thing I was thinking about, okay, maybe I do go with some ally package. It sounds like you're not, right? You're just planning on
I don't think I'm playing allies. I don't think I am, unless there's a talent ally.
that should be Molly Maxwell, right?
Yeah,
Um,
pretty much.
but you can put in, like I said, Jessica Hyde seems good, and then you can put Peter, and that when have those pair ever let you down, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Um, and that starts to get you every boost except for intellect. So then your savant on an intellect test is like +4, multiplied by 2 is 8. That's pretty good. Oh, you know
Yeah,
what's
that
hot
is.
tech in innate? What about this helping hand?
Yep. Commit and double. And I
So
think it's one of those things that like are helping, yeah, like the helping hands. It's interesting because I think that's like one of those things that I think is especially great when we're just starting out, when we're trying to pass those intellect tests to learn traits.
yeah, so maybe passing those, you know, 4 or 5 intellect tests to learn traits is not that hard. It's just action intensive, and that sucks.
Yeah. I mean, do you think one of us is going to auto fail the test at 0-1?
You got to commit to take heart to the first one.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
What else we got here? The upgraded manual dexterity and guts, I think, is nice. Um, hmm. How many are there compared to practice? There's 62 here. I know there's a lot of duplicates, but just
Just
checking
50
it
on this
out.
one. 51.
51.
But like I was looking at even like fighting lessons. I think that card's incredibly good here.
It is. You're right.
Yeah.
You don't get the double to when you commit to someone else, but still, you could use it yourself. What do you think about the expert ones or whatever the Edge of the Earth ones are called. I guess some of them are developed too that
Yeah.
are like
The
defensive stance.
I mean, I think those cards are pretty like generically playable. The only thing is, I think that there's better options at 0, right?
Hmm.
Like unless what you're doing with like Jessica and Peter, like unless you're boosting those stats passively, I think that like I would rather just play like able-bodied over this, right? Because it kind of will do the same thing. It'll give you 4 icons for a test.
Okay, Bestow Resolve has ritual. That's what I'm throwing that in as another dumb idea.
I mean, so I think that is legit. I think Bestow Resolve actually can be pretty legit here because it makes everything potentially double up, right?
Hmm.
Like every card in your hand that has those things, you can double. The only downside is it does spend charges,
Yeah,
but alchemical distillation can add charges. I did check that when you asked. You were like, it does that, right? And it does do that.
that seems interesting.
So,
Oh
I
man.
will just say I've been putting together like just cards on Tabletop Simulator over here for my deck,
Hmm.
and I'm actually running to a point where I actually need to cut cards. So I think this is actually a good sign. And I actually even got the skill yet. This is basically just talents and spells that I'm looking at.
All right, let me go over to TTS and we'll take a look together what you're cooking up and maybe even that helps us look at a better like distribution of stuff
Mhm.
to pass tests versus stuff to actually do something in the game.
Yeah.
So let's do that. All right, here we are. So what are you looking at?
So I'm putting String of Curses as a spell, which is really nice because it kills Brotherhood
Oh
cultists,
my
which I
God,
think
yes.
is like super important for us. Voice of Ra again because it's economy that I can play. Also commits like again looking at the symbols.
Hmm.
I have Missivrilla as a spell option because I think we do need to be evading more than that. I'm looking at either Wither or Shriveling for my. I know I'm a big Wither guy lately, and that's kind of been the meme, but it not using charges I think is particularly relevant, especially if we also do Sixth Sense here. Just to set it and forget it playstyle, I think is really important.
Hmm.
Um, and then I don't know if I'm going to do all 10 of these, but my thought process is as soon as I learn talent, these are now just cards I can commit, right? I only need to play realistically one of the level 0 ones, and then they all upgrade over time because I'm also going to be running the 2 arcane researches and down the rabbit hole.
Okay.
Looking over here as well, astral travel I think is definitely going to make it to at least scenario 2. Um, the only thing is if I am doing down the rabbit hole, this might stay longer, so I might just run it as a one of.
Hmm.
And then I'm looking at these, even though the boost they give is pretty minor, just being able to commit even for like a fist icon to put it up, I'll still going to be at 6, which I think is still just hard to say like no to because it is they are pretty juicy.
So
Other spells, so going to my scratch pad here,
yeah.
um, the I think that like Power Word I think is a good choice here because for the reasons you said, you learn the trait and then it's done, right? For customizable cards, you don't need to worry about like learning anything else. That experience is always in your deck, and I think it's also going to be pretty good for this one, because it lets us manage enemies. Yes, it is a lot less action efficient than it was before, right?
Hmm.
Um, and especially also for the Yithians, it's not like the same kind of thing. I still think it is worth the consideration here.
All right, so my question, looking at what you have, which is not complete, but so where's your how are you answering the card drop issue?
That's where the talents come in.
Okay.
So, like I'm not too like my thought process is that um my resources are going to be more valuable than my card draw in this deck. Um
I can see
that is
that. Yeah.
it's actually one of those things where it wasn't even my one of my concerns about how to find card advantage because my plan, especially when I get to these ones, this card is basically worth a guts every turn. Is kind of like that's where the card draw is answered when
Hmm.
I get to those upgraded versions. I think finding the balance for these is where it's going to become tough. Like where the tough part is finding the right amount of these talents to put in my deck. Like I don't think I'll need like I think anything that has brain, I'll run a 2 of. Like I think like these ones and then maybe like a 1 of each of these. This like seems cleaner for this if we go that way. Because if I am building around spells, brain is going to be more important to me.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. And I think I might do something similar maybe not as many, but I think the hyper awareness makes the cut for me because I think I am gonna lean into intellect, trying to pass those tests more often.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Maybe I
Yeah,
get more clues than usual, and then kind of I don't know, like the classic seeker rogue kind of combination of you evade the enemies and then get clues and let those problems be, killing them is not something you need to do all the time in TFA anyway. So maybe I'll let you do that minimal amount of killing.
yeah. I mean,
And
yeah, my thought process for my deck is I am what I need on that turn, right? Like, so like my hope is that I can manage, maybe not perfectly, but any issue that comes up is kind of like my hope. Because the downside is that these spectral razors don't actually work if I am going about brain as consistently, but
mhm.
uh, there is still, I think there is still value in here. I'm not 100% sold on those though.
Yeah, I just feel like 3 damage itself is hard to come by otherwise.
It's hard to come by otherwise, yeah. And like even that's the thing where I'm like looking at wither versus shriveling. There's the pros and cons for each. One is a little bit cheaper, one is has charges, but one deals more damage consistently, right?
Yeah. I also was very sad to look on the list that uh, Longshot, right, has no icons, and it's it would be really great, right, if you could do that. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking maybe Grizzly Totem level 0 can add an icon to it, and
Oh,
then you
maybe. Yeah.
double it.
Grizzly Totem. It gains another instance of one of its skill icons,
Ah,
so I don't think it works for the level
okay, so it's
0.
not like Min can do it.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, yeah, here's the level 3 version. Okay, so no long shot for me.
yeah.
uh
I mean, the practice versus innate is still a very tough choice.
yeah, it's true. Okay, well, this has been an hour-long video already, so I think I'm
Yeah,
gonna maybe cut it off here, and then we'll be cooking up. It may take us a little while to cook everything up here on our own, but you will see us the final version of this on Justin's first video, which will be actually playing Untamed Wilds, and hopefully we'll have figured it out by then. I think this is the overall plan. I'm gonna run with it. It may be terrible.
I honestly, I think it's going to be. I'm actually am surprisingly not scared. I'm more excited, which I think is a good sign. I mean, but maybe it's overconfidence. We'll find out.
I mean, I'm excited just because you try something dumb and you see if you can use your piloting skill. I think we talked about that when we played the sealed run, rather than just relying on your deck building prowess. This is a little bit different because now we make a lot of decisions, but we're restricted in some way. So
Yeah, no, it's going to be. No matter what, it's going to be a great time.
absolutely. So be
I
sure.
also just quickly looked up Intel report, and unfortunately, there's two bad traits on it.
Yeah, I know. I looked at these as well, and just buying things
Yeah.
is hard. So look for that over on Justin's channel. I don't know when you said the first video should go live on
The 15th. The 15th.
October 15th. Okay, great. Until then, thanks for hanging out with us, and you'll get to see us pull our hair out a little bit and be really happy and excited when things go well. Uh, but I'll see you later, and thanks, Justin, for being here on my
Yeah,
channel.
thanks for having me.